Good afternoon, folks, and we thank all of you for joining us on our webinar today. And the webinar title, a very exciting one, is Pride, Hope, and Love. And this webinar today is hosted by the Connecticut State Department of Education and put on by the Kid Governor program, which is a program created by the Connecticut Democracy Center. And just so you know, my name is Steve Armstrong, and I'm the Social Studies Consultant here at the State Department of Education. And I'm very excited to be part of this today. And I'm going to turn it over to Brian Cofrancesco, and Brian will introduce himself and we'll tell you about the rest of the program.
Okay, thank you, Steve. And thank you to the State Department of Education for hosting today's webinar. I would like to welcome the many educators, support staff, administrators, parents, and other school community members from across the state and even the country who are joining us for today's webinar. My name is Brian Cofrancesco, and I am the head of the Kid Governor program for the Connecticut Democracy Center at Connecticut's Old State House. We are thrilled with today's turnout and look forward to a meaningful discussion and training. Before I introduce our Kid Governor, I'd like to quickly tell you a little about our program. Kid Governor is an award-winning civics program created by our education team at the Connecticut Democracy Center. It is a groundbreaking approach to civics education that immerses students in learning about state government, elections and voting, and civic participation through a real-life election for our state's Kid Governor. Students work with their classmates to research issues important to them and to create action plans for a better world. Like real candidates, they craft platforms and film campaign videos, and thousands of fifth graders watch the top videos, vote, and make their voices heard. The elected student serves a one-year term of leadership and advocacy as Connecticut's Kid Governor, working to fulfill their winning platform. Many of today's attendees are Kid Governor teachers, and I thank each of you for bringing our program into your classroom and for teaching your students these important lessons of civics and active citizenship. If you work or have family in a Connecticut school that does not participate in Kid Governor, please encourage your fifth grade teachers to visit ct.kidgovernor.org to learn more about our program. There is no cost to participate, and we are happy to speak with teachers about how their schools can sign up. If you live outside of Connecticut, visit our national website, kidgovernor.org, to learn more about how you can bring the Kid Governor program to your state. The Democracy Center is building a national movement in civics education through Kid Governor, with programs already established in Oregon and New Hampshire, and your state could be one of our next affiliates. And now let's jump in on this evening's Pride, Hope, Love webinar. This past fall, nearly 6,400 Connecticut fifth graders participated in the statewide election for the 2019 Connecticut's Kid Governor. The fifth grade voters elected East Hampton resident Ella Briggs, who is a student at the CREC Anna Grace Academy of the Arts Elementary Magnet School in Avon. Ella ran on a platform of Pride, Hope, Love, focused on LGBTQ youth safety. Her platform is centered on 3 points: creating youth programs for LGBTQ youth and allies, training teachers on how to work with LGBTQ youth, and promoting adoptions for homeless LGBTQ youth. Ella is working with the Democracy Center during her one-year term to achieve her campaign goals and encourage students across Connecticut to take action on LGBTQ youth safety. She describes herself as a kind, empathetic, and determined leader who is passionate about helping others. So without further ado, I would like to introduce your 2019 Connecticut's Kid Governor, Ella Briggs.
Thank you, Mr. C. Hi, everyone. Welcome to my Pride, Hope, Love webinar. I am so excited that you are taking the time out of your busy schedules to join us here this evening. This webinar fulfills the second point of my 3-point Pride, Hope, Love platform, to train teachers on how to work with LGBTQ youth. I know firsthand the struggles that LGBTQ students face in schools every single day. I also know that you are all here tonight because, like me, you want to help LGBTQ students in your school communities feel like they are safe, they are special, they have a right to an amazing educational experience, and that they deserve to feel loved. I want to thank the Connecticut Democracy Center, the Connecticut State Department of Education, and Sarah Free from the Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence for helping me to make this possible tonight. I'm looking forward to sharing some personal stories with you and hopefully learning right along with you how we can all provide a more equitable and safe learning environment for all of us. It is now my honor to introduce tonight's facilitator, Sarah Free.
Hi, everybody. This is Sarah Free speaking. I am the program manager for middle schools at the Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence. I'm also a former middle school and high school teacher, and I've had the honor of meeting and working with Ella over these last few months. And I'm going to be approaching tonight's webinar from, I think, a pretty unique perspective. Before I continue, I'll go on to talk about my preferred pronouns. I use the pronouns she and her, and I also identify as gay and lesbian, which I use interchangeably. And in giving this webinar, the primary component is really discussing how we can create safe and inclusive environments in schools and school spaces for our LGBTQ youth. I was a queer student myself. I didn't come out until my sophomore year of college. I was then a teacher who also identified as gay, and I didn't come out to my students until my third year teaching. And now the work that I do is really centered around using emotional intelligence skills and our knowledge of how we can use those skills to create safe spaces for all of our students. And so the first part of the webinar this evening is really going to be about discussing and getting stories from some of our students who are still in school. As all the educators in this webinar probably know, I'm sure this isn't your first webinar, we go to these and oftentimes, of course, we're talking about students and the student experience, but we never actually get to hear from the students themselves. And so with that said, I'm going to turn it over to Ella and Lewis to introduce themselves, and then we're going to walk into a facilitated discussion about their school experiences.
My name is Ella. My pronouns are she, her, and I identify as lesbian.
Hello everyone, my name is Lewis Cruz. I'm a 12th grader at East Hartford High School and I identify as gay, and my pronouns are he and him.
All right, so to get us started, we're just going to walk through some common language so everybody understands the terminology that we're using moving forward. We can create some norms around the language that we're using. And so many folks on this webinar, maybe you aren't familiar with the various letters and acronyms that are used to refer to the LGBTQ community. Tonight, the title of this webinar includes LGBTQIA+, which, as you can tell, is kind of a mouthful to say, but I'm going to walk through each of the letters and then talk about the language that I'll be using to make it a little bit more concise and make sure that we're all on the same page. So LGBTQIA+ is an acronym that's used to represent and describe various sexual and gender identities. The L stands for lesbian, the G for gay, the B for bisexual, the T for transgender, the Q for queer or questioning, the I for intersex, the A for asexual, and then we add the plus because our understanding of people's identities when it comes to sexual orientation and gender identity is ever expanding, and we include the plus on there to remain inclusive and to keep ourselves open to learning. And so throughout this training, you're going to notice that I might use the word queer. I actually used it earlier when I referred to myself as a queer student. And I might use that from time to time just to make things a little bit more concise, and so I don't have to spell out LGBTQIA+ every time I refer to the community. And an important note about this word is that it comes with some historical baggage around it, especially for some folks that might be older within the community. And I think an important part of thinking about this idea of pride and hope, when we think about hope, we think about the potential that we have to move forward. And what we're going to do tonight is start using the word queer so we can not only reclaim that word, but also allow ourselves to identify in solidarity as a community. And as a tip, for those of you who are on this webinar, if you are a straight or cisgender ally, always ask before you use the word queer, depending on your company. Some people might have a negative connotation with that word and they might feel uncomfortable with you saying that. So just like with many of the other things that we're going to be talking about tonight, it's always best practice to ask before you use the word. All right, so to get rolling on our student discussion, I think arguably probably the best part of this whole webinar, we're going to talk to Lewis and Ella just about their school experiences. And so you might notice that the voices are going to change here and there. And so I ask that we just kind of pay close attention. I'm going to ask the question, and then Ella and Lewis, you guys can just decide who's going to answer first. If you want some more time to think, I can also speak from my own experience too. So our first question tonight is, how would you describe your school experience as a member of the LGBTQIA+ community?
My experience has been kind of up and down. At a former school that I went to, a teacher that doesn't work there anymore, they were not very supportive of me, and that, like, really hurt my feelings, and it made me feel very upset. But at my new school right now, I just jump-started a gay-straight alliance, and I'm really trying to make a difference right now. So it's kind of been half and half.
What about you, Liz?
So currently my experience in East Hartford High School, which I go to, has been very well. My community, my teachers, my peers, they have all been very accepting of me. So it has made my journey at East Hartford High School a lot easier. In my previous school, it wasn't difficult, but like usually I was the only kid out, or I was known as the gay kid. So
yeah, sure.
I felt like I had to keep my personality reserved, so I didn't get to live my full truth. But everyone knew I was gay, but I wasn't my full self. So coming to East Hartford High School, I really learned to blossom, and I learned that I don't have to put restrictions on my personality. So it has influenced me, and it has really taught me that, I don't have to change myself. So it has been really eye-opening.
Amazing. And I just sit here as somebody who didn't come out until I was almost 20 years old, and I'm just so in awe of the young people that are with us here today. And I think so much of what they're speaking to is, for all of our teachers that are in the webinar, folks that are interfacing with students every day, one thing that I heard from both of their answers was that it kind of differed, their experience differed depending on the school that they were at. And I think so much of that speaks to the idea of school climate and culture. And what I'm going to be talking about today is really learning how to strengthen our relationships with our students, strengthen relationships with each other as staff and faculty, to ultimately create a culture and a climate that is safe and is one that all students feel proud to be a part of. So jumping down to our next question, what has been your proudest moment as a member of the community? This could be at school, this could be out of school, kind of where did you feel like you were the most proud to be who you are?
Well, I have 2 times. Once, when I found out that I won the Kid Governor program, and I won Kid Governor, I was so happy and I was so proud of myself, and I just couldn't believe it, and I just couldn't wait to get started. And twice I was at a pride parade. I forget where it was. And I think it was in New Haven. And I had a lot of fun. I got to meet a lot of interesting people, and they were also supportive, and it was a lot of fun.
My proudest moment as a member of my community was becoming president of our LGBT club at our school. It has really been, like, it's just like you get to show people that you can be a leader no matter who you are. So becoming president of this club, a lot of people come to me for guidance.
Yeah.
And it makes me proud because I was once someone who was looking for guidance, but I never got that. Mm-hmm. So being that type of person for people in my community and people outside of my community has really shown me that it's it's really awesome to be part of this community.
Yeah, yeah. That reminds me of the quote. There's a quote that says, "Be the person that you wanted or that you needed when you were younger." And I think that you guys are showing the leadership that being that person really requires. And I think that also doesn't come, without its hard moments and without its sacrifices. And so I'd be interested to hear what have been some hard moments in being a part of this community.
The hardest moment for me, probably either coming out at school or coming out to family members. It was really scary, and I didn't really know what was going to happen, but most of the time they were supportive. There's always going to be some people that aren't supportive, and that's okay, but that's probably the hardest thing that I've had to do.
Yeah, definitely. What about you, Louis?
Some of the hardest moments that I have encountered, being president of my club, it really puts a target on your back for people who are not supportive of our community. So in my East Hartford High School, it is really accepting, but there are a few kids who like to pick. So people come by our room and stuff like that, and they shout really meaningful things. And outside of the club, I represent my entire club as president. So a lot of people, they say things to me that I don't take to heart. But sometimes the people in my club who are fresh to their identities and new to our community, they really feel hurt, and it's hard to see them like that, knowing that I was there.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. So in thinking about both the triumphs and the struggles of being out, especially being out while you're still in high school, or middle school, elementary school, what have your teachers done to help support you? What has been something that a staff member or a teacher has done that's kind of helped you along the way?
So I have a fantastic principal and vice principal and amazing teachers and helpers all across my school. I have a specific teacher who identifies as gay, and he has always really been very helpful and supportive for me. He helped me make my Kid Governor video. He helped me jumpstart my GSA, which I'm now the president of, and he's really helped me through everything. So I just want to give a big thank you to him.
Thanks for that. What about you, Liz?
So we also have a very awesome principal who supports us 100%. So something that he has done for us is every year he approves our True Color strip.
Oh, great.
Yes, and all the other strips we need, so that way people in our community see that we're not alone. Yeah. There's a bunch of people out there that are just like us and waiting to meet people within our community as well. And people in my school always ask questions such as, what should I say to someone who identifies as this? Or, how can I support my friend? And stuff like that. So it shows that people are caring and people are willing to listen.
That's amazing. And for those folks on the webinar who aren't from Connecticut, True Colors is an annual LGBTQ youth conference where thousands of youth and allies across the state come and gather and have discussion groups. They attend workshops, and it's really just a place for students to go and meet others who also identify within the queer community, also meet allies, and really learn about different topics and skills relating to our community. And so lastly, also in thinking about kind of the school setting, what do you think your teachers and staff members could have done better? And, we don't need to name names in particular, but just generally speaking, where do you feel like they could have done better either for you or for other kids?
I feel like when I am getting bullied because I'm lesbian, or I feel like they just kind of push it over, they don't really care about it as much as even if someone is like that to someone else. I feel like they could have let me know that they were going to have a talk with that student, or maybe just let me know that, they always support me and that they're going to help me no matter what. Because that would just, for teachers, that's just nice to hear from your teachers, for, a student to hear, because it makes them feel like, you're on their side and like that you'll be there for them.
Yeah, and I hope all of our teachers on this webinar are really listening to that and hearing the idea that to be there for your students, it's not just about being inclusive in your curriculum, it's not just about talking about the issues, but it's about showing up in those hard moments too. What about you, Lewis?
So something I think that people in our school system can do better is kind of not assuming, someone's identity. We have a few kids in our club that come to us and like venting, stuff like that, saying that their teachers are not listening to what they're saying in terms of their identity and how to represent them. And I think if you don't put thought into your students and how they feel, it kind of gives off a bad vibe between you and your student.
Yeah.
And it doesn't allow the student to be willing to learn from you personally as a teacher. So I think, setting some ground rules and making sure you get to know your students one by one and how they operate and how they think. I think that can really help someone.
Yeah, it's almost like I hired these two because their two answers are literally what I'm going to be talking about today in the webinar. So I'm really excited about that. And I just want to ask a more open-ended question, if there's anything that you want to add before we jump into the rest of the webinar. No pressure, but if there's anything you wanted to add.
This is just like a tip maybe for teachers. So I've noticed that in like classrooms they'll say like boys and girls, boys and girls, boys and girls, like, and some gender fluid or non-binary students could take that like the wrong way, and they could, because that kind of makes them feel not included. So maybe instead of like saying boys and girls, you can say like all right everyone, or like all right friends, so they can feel like they're part of the group too.
Absolutely, that's a great point.
Go ahead, a tip too.
Perfect.
I would say if you know someone or have a friend that is having trouble finding their identity or how to come out, I would say not to push them. It's good that you want to be a supportive friend, a shoulder to cry on or someone to vent to, but this coming out is a very personal journey. Yeah. And I 100% believe that is something that they need to do on their own when they feel right. So like pushing and like trying to shove them out the closet is just not the way to go.
Yeah, definitely. I think I have definitely been there with friends who have meant well, but it really just in the long run doesn't work. You have to allow people to do it on their own. Awesome. Well, throughout this webinar, as I work through some of our key points, Ella, Lewis, if you want to pop in and say anything, you're more than welcome. I'm going to ask our webinar participants just to take a look at the slide that's up right now. We're going to be talking through the objectives of this and what you can hope to take away by the end of it. So at the end of this training, the hope and the aim is that you're able to go back to your school setting, back to your classroom, back to wherever you are interacting with students, and have really concrete, actionable steps to be able to take back into your classroom. Because I think sometimes, ideas in the big picture, they sound good, but we always want to know, what can I actually bring back to the classroom with my kids? And that's what we're going to be talking about today. And then secondly, I want to be able to serve as a conduit between you as educators and other resources that exist. I don't want us to see this webinar as kind of like the one-stop shop, this is everything all in a nutshell, but rather I want you to be able to learn from my perspective as somebody who works in a research center that focuses on how emotions influence teaching and learning. But also I want you to be able to have access to numerous resources that are available for you as educators. All right, so to kick us off, we heard Lewis and Ella's stories, and in many of the trainings that I give, actually in all of them, I'm always in a room in front of people, and so I'm going to ask that we all just kind of pretend that we're in the same room together. Usually I have more of an audience to play off of, but we're going to begin this just the same anyway. So one of my favorite quotes to lead with in these trainings is the following: "There isn't anyone you couldn't love once you heard their story." So folks in the webinar, I'm going to ask that you just take a second and think about one student that you taught, maybe a student that you met, where once you heard their background story, once you learned more about them, it kind of better illuminated the person that they are. things made a little bit more sense. And so when we think about, especially those students who might be queer or questioning, we think about the first part of that is the coming out process. And for students who are queer and for people who are queer, you first have to come out to yourself before you come out to others. And sometimes that's the hardest part. And so these two photos that you'll see on the slides are from a workshop that I gave at True Colors about 1.5 years ago. And this was a group of middle school students, and I asked them, when you think about coming out, what emotions come to mind? What do you feel? And you see things like anger, awkward, emotionally exhausted, worried, overthinking. And even though we might not be able to change those emotions that these students felt, what we can do as educators is lighten the load. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. And so in understanding how we can build safe spaces, how we can lighten the load for kids who are queer, kids who are questioning, and even for our allies, we can remember this acronym, which is hopefully, given the topic of today, is easy to remember. So it's ALLIES, ALLIES. And these are 6 steps that you can bring back to your classroom to be able to better support your students. And so I'm going to walk through these bullet by bullet, and then as we move forward through the webinar, I'm going to go more in depth into each one, talk about a little bit of research, talk about things that you can do with your students and with your fellow staff members to really make these different points come to life. So the A is address harassment when you see it. And I think so much of what our youth just pointed to is sometimes there's a reluctance to address harassment when teachers see it. And we want to make sure that we're acknowledging that addressing harassment in the moment, even as an adult, is one of the hardest things to do. I think conflict for most people rather, is a difficult thing. And even as a teacher who objectively holds more power than a student, this can still be difficult. But before we walk into some tips on how to address harassment, I want to make a point about what the research is showing us. And some of the most groundbreaking research on school climate, on supporting our queer students, shows that when there are teachers within a school setting who are willing to intervene when they see harassment, when they hear harassment that's based on gender and sexuality, the willingness of the teacher to do that and the presence of those educators predicts student self-esteem within the school context. And so if you're thinking about how can I take a step towards making sure that my kids feel good about who they are and where they are, one first step is addressing the harassment when you see it and when you hear it. And so some tips for addressing harassment, the first thing that you want to do is call it out in the moment. So if you hear something in the hallway, you hear a student say something, there doesn't need to be a long conversation in front of others in the middle of the hallway, but what you do need to do is call out the behavior, call out the person who said it, and name it as unacceptable. And while the conversation that's a little bit longer can be had later, calling it out in the moment does a couple of different things. The first thing that it does is it sends the message to both queer and straight students that this behavior is not acceptable. And I want to acknowledge that it might feel awkward to call it out in the moment. It might feel uncomfortable, but I want us to think about the feelings and the emotions of our students. And what message does it send when, as a teacher, you're walking down the hall, you hear something, you don't say anything, and then students see that you didn't say anything. So whenever it gets difficult or whenever it gets hard, I recommend that we put ourselves in our students' shoes and thinking about the message that we're sending them. Down at the bottom, I included just some words that you might hear as slurs that could be commonly used by students. If you hear students say things like gay, but they're using it to mean something is stupid or something is weird, if you hear the words fag or faggot, dyke, or tranny, call it out in the moment, as uncomfortable as it might be, and think about the message that it sends your students if you don't say anything. So the next tip and the next part, the next actionable step that you can bring back to your school is really in my wheelhouse. So like I mentioned, I work at a research center where we study the way that our emotions affect both teaching and learning. And some of the research that recently came out from our center last summer shows that students who identify as LGBTQIA+, report less frequent experiences of having positive emotions in the school place. And in addition to that, they also have less frequent positive school experiences, and this includes relationships with teachers. And so when we think about how we can best be allies, how we can best support our queer and our questioning students, the first thing that we want to think about is, what are we feeling around these issues and around these topics? Because so much of being able to be an effective ally is first doing the work with yourself and unpacking your own feelings, your own experiences, and your own baggage that might come with it, even if you identify as straight. So some questions that you might ask yourself include, when you think about bringing up inclusive curriculum, or when you think about addressing harassment, what are the feelings that come up? Are you nervous? Are you apprehensive? Do you get defensive? Or are you excited? Really understanding the source of the feelings that you're feeling and addressing them is that first step in understanding how you can best be an ally. Because if you do not understand your own feelings around these topics, if you don't understand some barriers to being an effective ally, you're not going to be able to do the job that you want to do. So another step to take is label and understand your own feelings when it comes to being more inclusive around LGBTQ students and addressing harassment when you see it. So the next L is lead by listening. And this is going to have two components to it. And the first component is listening to your students. And when we talk about listening, we're talking about traditional listening, of course. If your student has something to say to you, if they want to talk after class, of course, giving them your attention and your time. But also we want to think about the opportunities that we're giving students to tell us different things. So give yourself the opportunity to listen with journal entries, maybe with classroom circles. When you bring up current events around the LGBTQ community, what do you notice about students' reactions? How are you listening to the way that they react? Are students nodding their heads in agreement, or do you see people laughing and whispering? So it's important to be able to pay attention to those nuances within your classroom and really understand through their behavior, what are your students telling you? And then that last bullet, make sure that you're introducing opportunities to discuss queer historical figures, statistics about our community, and different accomplishments from queer figures, whether that's in pop culture, whether that's in sports or politics, but really make sure that you're taking the opportunity to introduce a diverse array of historical figures and characters when you can. So the next part is really about listening to what other staff members are doing. So when we think about normalizing inclusive, safe spaces for LGBTQ students, we want to first think about what it's going to take to create a paradigm shift if that's necessary. And that might include designing efforts to publicly acknowledge staff members who have done a really great job at promoting an inclusive environment. If that seems a little too formal, maybe a little bit out of your league, one thing you can do that doesn't take any time and very little energy is understanding, if you know who some of your queer kids are, pay attention to what teachers they gravitate towards. Think about the practices that that teacher might have in place, either personally and or within their own classroom. If you listen to the behavior of the teachers that students gravitate to, that's going to tell you something about how to best support these students. So this next point is exactly what Lewis was talking about, and that's interacting without assumptions. So in thinking about how we can interact with our students in a way that doesn't assume gender, doesn't assume sexual orientation, make sure you do a few different things. And Ella actually mentioned one of these points when she was talking. So at the beginning of the year, make sure you ask students what pronouns they prefer. And if you feel awkward or uncertain about how to do that, what you can do is just model it the way that we model it at the beginning of this webinar. You know, good morning, everybody. My name is Miss Free. I use the pronouns she, her, and hers. And as you have other students introduce themselves, it might feel awkward at first, but bringing it into your own practice is a way to normalize it and to make sure that students of all genders feel comfortable and welcomed. The second point, like I mentioned, is exactly what Ella said. So we want to avoid gendered language when we address our classes. So instead of saying something like boys and girls, you might want to use something like students or folks, friends, people, everyone. These are just different examples that I've heard. You want to make sure that you're not faking it. You want to make sure that it doesn't sound forced. Do what's right for your teaching style, and you'll find that it's easier than you might have thought to break these language patterns. And with that said, language patterns are something that it's very difficult to change. So have patience with yourself as you're trying new phrases, new words. I can speak personally and say that right now I'm trying to break the habit of saying you guys and saying something that's more gender neutral, and it's been difficult, and I'm somebody who thinks about this a lot. So, first and foremost, really have patience with yourself if you're making these steps to be more inclusive. So next, we want to make sure that we understand that as allies, it's not our job to find or seek out students who are queer or questioning. So when thinking about how we can best support students in the coming out process and once they're already out, we don't want to rely on stereotypes. The intentions might be good if you're trying to find these students so you can support them a little bit better, but we want to avoid this practice because we don't want to rely on stereotypes that indicate what it looks like, what it sounds like to be a certain identity. Because it's important to remember that all folks who identify within the queer community don't express that in the same way. We don't all have the same voice. We don't all dress the same. We're not a monolith, and I think that's really important to consider and to not make assumptions when we're interacting with our students. So the next letter in our acronym ALLIES is the E, and that's to empathize with affective statements. Some people who use restorative practices in their classes might be familiar with affective statements, and typically they're used to express your feelings in response to another person's behavior. And when we're thinking about ways to bring the topics of feelings and emotions into the classroom as a way to support our students, we can also use these feelings and these affective statements to reference current events or when you're discussing a book. So for example, if you are bringing up something like the trans military ban and you want to use an affective statement, maybe you can have a question prompt that says, how does this make you feel? What does this bring to mind? What does this bring to heart when you read this? And the best way to do that with your students really is just to model it. All right, folks, today I read this in the newspaper, and honestly, it makes me feel really sad. Affective statements are really all about just starting to introduce and normalize talking about feelings in the classroom. And one place this might work well, as I noted before, is in a circle setting, or you can use it around a current event or a book around LGBTQIA students and people that you discuss or read with the class. All right. The last letter in our acronym is the S, and that's scrutinize your curriculum. And this is really about asking yourself, who's represented in the curriculum that you're teaching? Whose perspectives are you including? And when we think about character analyses and role playing, especially for our ELA teachers, consider whose perspectives you're asking students to take. What perspectives are being ignored? And are there opportunities to include a more diverse array of people and characters and family structures? The next component to really thinking about our curriculum critically is to check the framing that we're using. So I think often it might be easier to rely on quote-unquote issues with the LGBTQ community, things like discrimination, or even I just mentioned the trans military ban, the emotional woes of the students, how hard it is. These issues are important, and it's important to understand them to be able to validate our kids, but we also have to understand the inverse. So ask yourself, where are LGBTQ individuals thriving in sports, in music, in politics, in pop culture? Make sure that you acknowledge and celebrate these instances and use them to balance out the harder topics. Because what we want to avoid is, again, relying on constantly talking about negative connotations or negative news, negative press around the LGBTQ community, and really show the places where these folks are also thriving. So in thinking about how to show your students that you're an ally, especially if you identify as straight or as cisgender, how do I make sure that my kids know that I'm there for them? In thinking through that, you want to model what it means to be an ally by practicing it in your role as a teacher. And what I mean by that is taking a few different steps. You want to make sure that you're highlighting queer people in your curriculum, like we just talked about. Make sure that you're acknowledging, you're recognizing, and honoring LGBTQ History Month in October and Pride Month in June. I think sometimes it's easy to fall into this pattern of, oh, well, that's not my area, I don't teach that. But all you have to do is acknowledge it, and your students will know. Also, don't forget the power of your physical space. When I think about how far we've come, even with the different safe space kits, with teachers having rainbow flags or stickers in their classrooms, I am not very old, and I can't remember one teacher that had any sort of any visual that showed me that they were even okay with the queer community. So consider getting safe space stickers, consider hanging a rainbow flag. It doesn't need to be huge, even if it's just a small flag that you're hanging up. And especially for those teachers that include pictures of historical figures around the room, make sure that you're diversifying who you're representing within your classroom. And this could be also an opportunity for you yourself to learn who the important LGBTQ historical figures are. So in thinking about when students are out to you as a staff member but are not out to their families, this is a really touchy subject and one that I think many teachers might experience. When we think about our responsibility as professionals, it's our job to maintain the trust and confidentiality between you and that student. It's not your job to go and tell the parent, it's not your job to go and tell other teachers, but when we think about really the bedrock of students thriving academically and socially in school, we consider the relationships that they're in, and we want to do our very best to maintain that trust. Of course, there is mandated reporting for certain instances, and really only if that information is absolutely necessary would you include it. But really focus on the relationship with that student and hold sacred the fact that that student has told you. In thinking about the people that students trust, if a student has come to you, has come out to you, and especially if that's still a secret to them and to other people, this is something that's important to acknowledge, it's important to honor, and make sure that you sustain that trust with that student. And then thinking about if you're not a classroom teacher, so if you are a clinician or a service provider, a paraprofessional, if you're support staff, if you're administration, there are a number of different routes that you can take. The first one that I would recommend is if you have your own physical space, like I alluded to earlier, don't forget the power of what students see when they walk into the space that you inhabit. Are they seeing pictures of people that look like them? Are they seeing flags that represent the communities that they are a part of? If you're an administrator, if you're a support staff, think about the role that you might take in spearheading various initiatives, even in showing up at different club meetings, acknowledging LGBTQ History Month, acknowledging Pride Month. When students see this sort of leadership from the top, and they see that the folks that hold much of the power within the school are not only acknowledging but validating the experiences of the queer community, this is a really powerful thing. So in thinking about our GSAs, a GSA historically was Gay Straight Alliance. There are a lot of different iterations of this now. Some schools call it the Rainbow Club, some schools call it the LGBTQ Club. It kind of varies from school to school. And if you're thinking about how to, one, engage families, and two, think about a GSA at all levels, whether that's elementary school, middle school, or high school, the first thing that you want to do is identify the focus of the GSA, because GSAs across developmental levels and across even geographic regions, across different campuses, students are going to need different things. There are some students that might want to take a really activist approach. There are some students that might just want to find other people to connect with. Some people may just want to help support a friend as an ally. So really think about the role of the GSA and the focus of what your club activities could be. And, just like with any other club, make sure you do plan activities for students, especially as it's beginning to start. But you want to make sure that the conversation that you're having from the get-go is, what is the focus of our GSA, but also give yourself the flexibility to change over time. In thinking about facing potential resistance from families or other folks, I think really some of the best defense is just knowing your state's laws. So there is a campaign from Lambda Legal called #Don'tEraseUs, and all you have to do is just enter that into Google, and that can tell you about the different anti-discrimination and bullying laws that exist within your state. And one thing that's important to note also is that GSAs cannot be banned from a school if there are other non-curricular student clubs that are allowed to exist. And Lambda Legal, Gleason, Human Rights Campaign, all of them on their websites offer various legal information, but I think the first step in being able to respond to folks that might be resistant or might push back or might try to shut down the club or shut down inclusive curriculum is just understanding the laws that pertain to your state. So I know in this webinar we have folks ranging from Illinois to Indiana to Connecticut, and again, because there are no federal anti-discrimination laws yet, federal anti-bullying laws, it really is up to you to do the legwork, to know the laws as they pertain to your state. And so again, you can Google Lambda Legal, Google Human Rights Campaign, Google Gleason, and all of that will be on their websites. And you can also follow them on Twitter too. So then in thinking about the different curricular resources that exist for teachers that want to make their curriculum more inclusive, that want to just check out what toolkits and lessons are out there, the Human Rights Campaign Foundation has a really great Welcoming Schools campaign where they have book lists, they have lesson plans, and I think in thinking about how we can support our students from all developmental levels, these next couple of slides will have more middle school and high school. But if we're thinking about how to support our elementary school students in thinking not only about how we can make them feel safe and included, but also how can we best transition them to move into middle school, Welcoming Schools has a lot of really great resources, not only around curriculum, but around how to best support these students. And some other resources that exist are the It Gets Better campaign, the Trevor Project. One new feature of the Trevor Project is that it actually provides an online chat and text messaging service. Gleason, many folks I'm sure are familiar with. Gleason also has various state chapters, but on their website they have a really comprehensive array of different toolkits, activities, articles. They're the ones that have the safe space resources like posters and stickers. So make sure to check out the Trevor Project, make sure your kids know about it, make sure to check out Gleason to think about ways that you can incorporate more inclusivity into your classroom. And so here, these resources are geared a little bit more towards older kids. So Unheard Voices is recommended for kids in grades 6 through 12. And this is an oral history curriculum project that highlights the stories of 9 important people in LGBTQ history. Also, if you have students that are older that are on social media, on Instagram, there's an account called LGBTQ History. That's an awesome one to follow. They post, if not daily, then at least a few times a week. For those folks who are teaching computer classes, maybe digital literacy, there's a resource for you all at the secondary level that talks about Alan Turing. He was the father of the modern computer, and it talks about how he remained true to himself regarding his identity. And then lastly, there's a resource for high school educators called He Continues to Make a Difference, commemorating the life of Matthew Shepard. One last slide for curricular resources. We have History Unerased, which offers free kits for different grade levels during the month of October. That's LGBTQ History Month. We have the Pi Harris Project, which is a set of videos of different LGBTQ people that discuss their experiences. QUIST is an LGBTQ history education organization that's focused on using different tech solutions to teach Quistory, which is queer history, in ways that are friendly depending on your grade level. And then lastly, in thinking about different podcasts that you might use, Making Gay History is a great podcast, and that is the host interviews various folks from throughout LGBTQ history and explores different topics that have been important to the community. And then there's the LGBTQ Heritage Theme Study, which is a publication of the National Park Foundation. And so right now what we're going to do is really open it up to some Q&A. I have a list of questions right here in front of me, so really just bear with me as I work through them. And Ella and Lewis, I'm also going to allow you guys just to pop in if you have anything to say during this. So our first question that we have is, what is the #1 suggestion that you have for teachers? And I can start this one off in saying that when we think about how to best support our students, I think the #1 suggestion that I have is really twofold. The first is, don't be afraid to talk about the LGBTQ community. Don't be afraid to talk about current events. Don't be afraid to hang a rainbow flag. When I think about what I needed as a student, I had no idea where any of my teachers stood when it came to whether or not they were LGBTQ friendly, and I, at that point, wasn't ready to ask them. And so I think let them know without them having to ask. But second, also just make sure that you're building solid relationships. As we know with education, really, like I mentioned before, the bedrock of all of this work is relationship building. And that applies, of course, to all kids, but especially to queer kids who might be facing some scrutiny at home. They might be having a difficult time coming out to their friends. You never know if you're that one person that they can connect with. So think of this, all of this work as relationship building work.
To kind of add on to what Sarah said, I think that you should just make sure that your kids know in any way possible that you are totally respectful and accepting of all of your students, no matter what. Hang up a rainbow flag in the first day of school. Say like school rules, like classroom rules, saying like we respect everyone no matter what, and that will make your students feel more safe.
I just really love how you mentioned the safe stickers and because freshman year they didn't have that, and then sophomore year I saw that almost all the teachers have that on their doors, and it really made me feel safer as an LGBT student. It really made my year better. Yeah.
I think it seems like such a simple thing, but I can't tell you what it means to students just to have that sticker up there. Because that sends a message not only to them, but to other students as well, that this is a safe space. So the next question that we have, I'm actually going to fold two of these questions together. There was one question that asked, are there any children's or young adult books to suggest for a 5th grade classroom? And I would suggest the Human Rights Campaign Foundation Welcoming Schools that I mentioned earlier. The URL is within this PowerPoint. That is an awesome resource. I'm coming from a more middle school and high school background, but they have book recommendations for all grade levels. And then the second question I was going to fold into that was, what are good resources to find LGBTQIA figures and events? Again, many of the resources that I mentioned, but again, if you're thinking of something that might be a little bit more user-friendly, you can do in your spare time, the Instagram page for LGBTQ history really is awesome, and I find myself learning new things almost every day. So make sure that you follow them. Really use social media to your advantage, because I think we're kind of in this interesting time period where kids and adults alike are learning more about our community through social media. So just do a little bit of research, maybe Google top LGBTQ accounts to follow on social media, and diversify your feed a little bit. I think that's a great way to learn as well. Our next question asks, what can we specifically teach our straight children about relationship building and being supportive in schools? I think from a teacher's perspective, really one of the biggest things here is teaching our students how to stand up and speak out for others in the moment when it feels uncomfortable. And so in thinking about, how we teach that, how do we allow students to build the confidence to be able to speak out against something in front of their peers, I think the first step in that is really asking students to think about what it feels like to stand up for somebody else, or what feelings come up when they think about speaking out, because we can't effectively be allies if, again, we're not unpacking our own baggage around it. And I think also role-playing is something that, students, it might be kind of jokey and funny at first, but really allowing students to literally practice saying things like, don't say that, that wasn't cool. It might seem corny to students in the moment, but any chance that we can take to allow students to step into that role and to practice in a really low-stakes environment is where we want to be doing that. So I think definitely teaching students how to be an upstander, but also in thinking about how we're allowing students to unpack their own emotions around these topics.
To kind of add on to that, if like you have younger children, you could even play dolls, and like a household has 2 dads or 2 moms. Like that is really important for kids to know at a young age. So when they finally, like if you keep your kids from knowing about it, when they find out, they're gonna be confused and they might be a little bit grossed out. And we want to help educate everyone about it. So that's a good idea.
Yeah, I think, that, Ellie, you just brought something up that I had written down to talk about, but I didn't. Any chance you can have, or any chance a teacher can take, rather, to show students that diverse family structures exist, whether that is 2 moms, whether that's 2 dads, whatever it might be. I think something like using dolls and role-playing at a very young age is an awesome way to do that. And again, I can defer to my personal experience. Growing up, within schools, we only learned that it was always a mom and always a dad. Like there weren't even single parents in what we were learning. So I think any chance that you can take to be able to diversify what you're showing kids about what it means to be a family, what you're showing kids about what it means to be a partner, what it means to be a family unit, it's really important to think about the structure of that family unit. Is there anything you wanted to add?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this reminds me of something that our advisor at our school did for our club. She brought in children's books that really represented different types of families. And something that was pretty cool was a book that was about penguins. It was about 2 gay penguins raising an egg and stuff like that. And it was like just kind of like putting that in there in the curriculum, and them being 2 dads wasn't even a big deal. It was just kind of, they're 2 dads and that's it, But just really showing that it's just as normal as a mom and a dad.
Exactly. I think that's such a great point. So much of this is about normalizing it, normalizing asking for pronouns, normalizing stating your own pronouns. One thing that I didn't mention when we're thinking about this idea of normalization, consider putting your pronouns in your email signature. That's just another way to show folks that you are on board, that you're trying to normalize this language. And like Lewis mentioned, any chance that we can take to show students that this is just like everything else is a chance that we should take. I have another question that says, how do we as teachers better support LGBTQIA students when administration has your hands tied? I think it's a very important and it's also a very tricky question. But again, I'm going to defer to knowing and understanding your state's laws, only because I don't have any more context around what it means to have your hands tied, but I'm imagining maybe they personally don't support it. They might think that parents will push back. Perhaps they think that there are laws against it. I would know and understand your state's laws. And then also you really want to think about who within your staff is on board with you, because it's hard to normalize things and make change as one person. And our power really comes in finding others who are like us, in speaking out, in really having a plan for how you want to make your school more inclusive and make your curriculum more diverse. So I think, again, knowing your state's laws, finding folks that are like you, but also at the end of the day, letting your students know that you are there for them. And that's just through modeling. Again, this is about relationship building, and any chance that you can take to build that relationship with students, to show them in very small ways that you support the community is the direction we should go in. And I hope that answers the question. There was another question. Is there anything that's too young or too soon to start some of these efforts for conversations? This is an outstanding question, because I think this is where I get the most pushback as somebody who gives these workshops and somebody who taught in a K-12 school. Really, there isn't anything that's too young or too soon. Because if you think about something, if the question is there anything that's inappropriate? Well, if it's inappropriate, you probably shouldn't be talking about it with students anyway. But there's nothing that's a kid can't be too young to see that a family can have two dads. A kid can't be too young to understand how to speak up against others. I think in thinking about how we can best prepare our students to be active and engaged citizens, to be active and engaged allies, is involving them in some of the tougher conversations. And what I mean by that is, like recently I actually had an experience where a parent said, I'm really excited to talk to my kid about these issues, but I don't want to bring them to any of the protests because I don't want them to see all the hateful things that people have to say. And I can speak for myself, and some people might disagree with me, but I think it's very important to also show kids why we're fighting and why we need to make these efforts. When students see that, sometimes that is the thing that clicks is, oh, this is the reason why we need to make this extra effort. So I am of the camp that there is nothing that's too young or too soon. Whoever asked this question, if you want to chat further or you feel like I can answer it better, again, feel free to email me. But I take a pretty hardline stance in that a kid is not too young for us to be able to show them that we love and support people of all orientations and gender expressions and gender identities. So I'm checking our chat box, and I think I got all of the questions.
All right. So, thank you everyone for attending my Pride, Hope, Love webinar. I hope you learned something that you can bring back to your school or your home to help LGBTQ students feel safe and loved. My term as Kid Governor continues through 2019, and I will be working to fulfill the rest of my Pride, Hope, Love platform. In fact, I will be announcing my statewide poster for 5th graders very soon. I hope you will follow my work as Kid Governor and share my Pride, Hope, Love platform with the students of Connecticut. Thank you again to Sarah Free, Louis Cruz, the State Department of Education, and the Connecticut Democracy Center for their help in making tonight's webinar possible. And thank you to all of tonight's attendees for joining us and for your commitment to help LGBTQ students feel safe in their schools. I will now pass things back to Mr. C. from the Connecticut Democracy Center.
Thank you so much, Ella. That was such a great webinar. Thank you to our panelists. Before we wrap things up, I did want to give Louis, Ella, and Sarah a chance to give any closing remarks if they have any.
This is Sarah jumping back in. Really quickly, I just wanted to say that I think the fact that we have educators that took the time to log on to this webinar, to take the time to learn how to best support our students, is something that I really want to express gratitude for. And in thinking about, who this webinar is going to touch, whether that's right now when it's live, whether that's later when it's recorded, I just wanted to thank the people who are on the ground with our students every day and really taking active steps to better understand how we can support kids like Louis, Ella, and me when I was a kid, and even me now as an adult.
Yeah, I totally agree with Sarah on that. I'm so grateful that all of you are here, and just always make sure that your kids, your students know that no matter what their gender identity is or their gender expression, that you will always love them no matter what.
I just want to thank everyone who's listening. It shows that you guys are actually caring and willing to listen. So I really appreciate it, and I think I can speak on for everyone else here that we also really appreciate you guys listening and keep fighting the good fight.
Thank you three so much. To Sarah Free from the Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence, Louis Cruz from East Hartford High School, and a special thank you to Stephen Armstrong and Jasenia Karras from the State Department of Education for all their help with tonight's webinar. Thanks to all of you, the attendees, for joining us to learn more about LGBTQ youth safety and Kid Governor Ella's platform. Be sure to follow her in her term in office at ct.kidgovernor.org and follow the program on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube. A recording of this webinar will be posted on the Connecticut Kid Governor website for educators, support staff, and others to download and to watch at any time. Please share it with those in your school community. That does it for tonight's webinar. On behalf of the Connecticut Democracy Center and the Connecticut's Kid Governor Program, thank you again to our panelists and to all of our attendees. I hope you have a great evening.